What's up guys, my name's Liam and today we're going to be taking a look at the Endgame Gear EMC Plus. This is a new control gaming mouse pad. I've been getting a lot of requests about it, so is this going to be the perfect gaming mouse pad for you? Let's check it out. Alright guys, and before we get started today, I did want to let you know that Endgame Gear did actually send this out to me. Thank you guys very much for that. However, with that being said, everything you're going to be hearing in this video is going to be my own words and my own opinions. This did arrive to my front door, flat packed in this envelope style box, and it's just a single box. There wasn't any type of additional box or sleeve inside of here, but you can go and hold on to this to store it. This comes in at two different options. They have a standard version, and that comes in at 410 millimeters in height by 490 millimeters in width, and then this is the plus version. This does come in at 500 millimeters in width, 500 millimeters in height, and these all sit at 3 millimeters in thickness. And the price differences between the two, the 490 by 410 comes in at $49.99. The 500 by 500 comes in at $53.99. The construction starting out over here at the bottom. This does use a pour-on base. It does have this little hexagon mini style pattern in it, and it feels great. This thing just suctions to your desk and has been sticking so well that I can't even make adjustments on it. You literally have to pick it up and peel it off before you're able to move it around. And then once you seat it flat, it doesn't go anywhere on you. And with the base coming in at 3 millimeters in thickness, I really do feel like this was the right choice to make by Endgame Gear. And the reason I'm saying that is I do feel like this pad is a bit softer than the other styles of like the Saturn Pro and stuff like that. Those kind of feel a little bit more firm to me. So the fact that this does feel so soft and so plush, I do believe that if they were to go to a standard 3.5 or the 4 millimeters, I think it would have been a little too much personally if it would have carried over the same properties, and your mouse probably would have felt like it was sinking in a little too much. So I really feel like 3 millimeters on the way that this pad feels is really the sweet spot. The stitching is done incredibly well. It feels super premium. It does sit slightly a bit lower than the base, and it doesn't get in your way. I didn't even notice it there the entire time I was using this. They do have their logo up here in the top right corner, and it does kind of stick off the surface itself. It does feel kind of like a little vinyl sticker graphic or something like that. I never ever go up in the top right corner of my pad. I actually feel like that's a really good place to put it for me personally, but when you do kind of move your skate over it, you can slightly feel it, but again, I never had an issue where I went up there and it interrupted me during my gameplay. The surface does kind of feel like your typical cloth style of a pad. On the y-axis, you do feel a little bit more texture, and you feel a little bit less of the texture as you're going across on the x-axis. However, I do want to note that the x and y-axis are actually equal to one another when it comes to terms of speed. And a couple things to note is the surface does not have any type of coating on it. And another thing is that I feel like it performs incredibly well and consistent in humidity. It is very humid where I'm at right now, and I never felt like there was a time where it performed differently depending on the time of day, whether it's getting a little bit more humid or not. It felt really solid through and through. And I never noticed there was a time where it felt like it was getting too muddy or slowing down any more than normal. I have found that it has been attracting hairs, so you just want to make sure that you want to stay on top of it with keeping this thing clean. And when it comes to the performance, we're going to jump into some comparisons here shortly. However, I do want to let you guys know that this is a little bit on the quicker side. It's not as slow as something like the GSR or the Infinity Mice Infinite Control Pad. The general speed kind of sits in line with something like the VAXI PA, GSR SE, Saturn Pro, and things similar to that. The performance of the EMC truly is great. It has a really smooth glide across the X and the Y axis, and the thing that's really cool about this surface is it is a little bit softer. So when you're actually going tracking shots and pushing into the pad, it does offer you a really great sense of control and stopping power. It does have a bit of initial friction. However, I don't feel like it's too overwhelming or too muddy. It does give you a really great sense of control down in the micro adjustments. And I did notice some differences the way that this performs with different style skates. I do feel like getting the best type of performance on this surface, since it is a soft control pad, is with the bigger style skates. Now on the Endgame Gear XM2WE, they do kind of have these harder style PTFE skates. If you were using something a bit thinner and softer like the Esports Tiger skates, these harder style skates on the XM2WE, they do give you a little bit less initial friction and a little bit of a quicker glide. And if you're using something softer, it does give you a little bit more static friction. You do get a little bit more control glide and just a little bit more stopping power over the firmer style skates. And when compared to using something like the corner style skates, the corner skates do give you a little bit faster of a glide. You do get a little bit less initial friction. However, when you are using the corner skates or even smaller types of skates, they do sink into the pad a bit more. So across the surface, if you do have a light grip on your mouse, it does feel quicker, but when you're actually using it and gaming, if you're to push in a mouse 1 and 2 while you're tracking, it sinks in a bit more and it almost gives you a little bit of a muddier feeling, to whereas when you're pushing into the pad and doing the tracking back and forth on these bigger skates, it does feel a bit smoother. And like I'd mentioned with the dot skates, me personally, I don't really prefer to play with dot skates so much on control pads, but as you can see there, it does give you a much quicker glide. But again, when you start pushing in, it does give you kind of that sinking feeling. I have found that it does kind of negate it the more that you do put more dot skates on here and you keep them closer together. But again, to get a little bit less of that sinking feeling, it does help to use the bigger style skates. And if you are a user of glass skates or the Sapphire skates, when you're using glass skates and pushing into this pad, and again, it can be just something to do with the fact that I'm a really hot and humid environment right now, it does feel a little bit muddier with the glass skates. And overall, when you're gliding these across the surface, they feel pretty equal to one another. But again, when you start pushing in more, I do feel like you get a little bit smoother and a little less muddier feeling if you're using PTFE skates or the glass skates. And then when it comes to the Sapphire versus the PTFE, I definitely feel like the Sapphire is a little faster. It does give you a little less initial friction. And when you're really pushing in and trying to do those micro adjustments back and forth, again, it just has less friction and it gives you a little bit of a quicker and smoother glide overall. All right, so first off, when we're comparing the Endgame Gear EMC to the Infinity Mice Infinite Control, like I mentioned, if you guys haven't seen my review on the Infinite Control, this is really in line with the Zowie GSR pad. And coming back and forth, comparing these two to one another, the Infinite Control is a much slower pad overall. You do have a little bit less initial friction when you're using the EMC. It is a bit quicker. It is easier to make the micro adjustments when going back and forth, whereas the EMC doesn't necessarily feel muddy, but it does feel a lot more slowed down and a lot more controlled. And then you do get a much greater sense of stopping power on the Infinite Control. So let's go ahead and drop the glide test between the Infinite Control and the Endgame Gear EMC. All right, so next up, when comparing the Endgame Gear EMC to the Lethal Gaming Gear Saturn Pro Soft. Like I mentioned earlier, the EMC is 3 millimeters in thickness. The new Lethal Gaming Gear Soft version comes in at 3.5 millimeters. You can also get their X Soft version that comes in at 4 millimeters. The overall feeling and performance of these pads, they feel incredibly similar to one another. I've seen a lot of people out there saying that the Endgame Gear EMC is a slower version of the Saturn Pro, and in my testing, I have found that they're actually equally about the same speed, but there are some differences in them that make them perform different from one another. Starting out with the Lethal Gaming Gear Pro, it does feel like a bit of a heavier pad, and it just feels a little bit more firm overall. As you can see here when I'm lifting it up, when you compare it to something like the EMC is much softer. It folds over much easier, and it just feels like a bit of a looser pad in the hands. And this softness on the EMC, it doesn't just translate to the overall base and feeling of the pad, it also does kind of feel with the surface as well. The surfaces on the two, they do feel pretty similar to one another when you're going across the Y and the X axis. But the one difference that I found is I kind of feel like on the Lethal Gaming Gear Saturn, it does feel just a little bit more firm and almost like it's like stretched out and a little tighter, whereas the EMC just feels a little bit looser. And how this impacts the performance when you're using these two side by side, again, if I were to put no pressure on the mouse and just slide it around, they perform almost equally similar to one another. But the difference is when you're actually using it. If you're to push into the pad anyway, whether you're, tracking somebody or anything like that, the Lethal Gaming Gear Saturn Pro, it feels like you have just a little bit less initial friction. And when you're pushing in the pad and gliding across, it does feel a bit quicker and like you have a little bit less stopping properties compared to the EMC. And I want to be very clear, these differences are minor, but I have noticed that when I was going back and forth and A and B testing these side by side when playing them in games, I did find when I was playing faster shooting games like Apex Legends or something like that, it was a little bit easier making the micro adjustments. making those minor corrections when I was using the Saturn Pro. And it's not that it wasn't any easier on the Endgame gear. I just feel like it gives you a little bit more control and a little more stopping power, and you do feel a slight bit more of friction there. So due to the fact that the EMC does feel a bit softer, I do feel like if you are looking for greater control and stopping power, that this could potentially slightly be the better option for you. Either way, I do want to be clear, the differences between these two are minor, and both of these pads are absolutely at the top of my tier list when it comes to control style pads. Are both really as good as it gets. All right, so let's go ahead and drop the glide test between the EMC and the Saturn Pro. Alright guys, so that wraps things up for the Endgame Gear EMC Plus. This is absolutely an S-tier pad. It feels incredible. The performance of it, I didn't notice any issues. It performed incredibly consistent. It felt great the entire time that I was using it, and I really feel like the Endgame Gear really nailed it down with the overall design of this. Alright guys, so if you have any additional questions or feel like I left anything out, please let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed watching this video and are interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, please drop this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I've left affiliate links for these products down in the description below if you're interested in picking any of them up and supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.